The Italian Grand Prix was all set to be a massive showdown between Max Verstappen and the Ferraris on their home turf. But as the penalties started racking up in free practice, qualifying became a complete farce. And then the race itself was completely ruined in the closing laps, leading the crowds to rain boos down from the grandstands. The team bosses are furious at the FIA's handling of the race and are demanding change. Let's look at the reasons why the Italian Grand Prix was a mess and what the FIA did wrong. The build-up to the Italian Grand Prix was actually quite exciting. Sure, Red Bull were the heavy favourites to take the win, but we knew Ferrari were bringing track-specific upgrades to try and take a win at their home race in front of the Tifosi. Budget caps have meant that track-specific upgrades are pretty rare now, so we really thought it could have made a difference for them. Mercedes were never really going to be in the fight in this race, as the low-drag tracks don't suit their barn door of a car, as Toto Wolff calls it. What happened though was a complete mess of a weekend, both on and off track, and it has the team bosses and media fed up and the fans sick. We'll cover the on-track stuff first, but stick around till the end because the weekend off-track was just as disappointing, if not more. By the time qualifying started on Saturday, 9 drivers had grid penalties due to taking replacement parts and having too many reprimands. As qualifying was going on, where drivers were finishing had almost no standing on what the starting grid was going to be. The FIA would almost have been better off drawing names out of our hat to work out the starting positions. In the hours after qualifying, journalists and fan forums were furiously debating what the starting grid was going to be, and it wasn't until late Saturday evening that we actually got a confirmed grid. Pierre Gasly even tweeted on Saturday evening asking what position he was going to start in on Sunday. Sky Sports F1 analyst and former F1 driver Martin Brundle was one of the many prominent journalists left frustrated by the situation and says another solution must be found. "It's unacceptable," he said ahead of the Italian Grand Prix. That's 2 of the last 3 races where you watch qualifying and the grid looks completely different. There are other ways of doing it. It's too much of a penalty for a driver, taking something that is outside of his control. A journalist friend of mine, Dieter Renken, said keep the grid as it is. Then those who have new engines take a drive-through penalty in the race as a penalty, so the driver is still taking some pain. We've read what feels like hundreds of ways that people would like to see the penalty system changed to stop a repeat of what happened at Monza. It takes away so much excitement from Saturday when you finish qualifying and realise that you have actually no idea what the grid will look like for Sunday. Brundle went on to offer his own solution. "My idea is a rising scale of percent of constructors' points, so the big teams up front would take more pain. Somehow, you've got to dissuade big teams from just throwing power units in every weekend. There has to be some type of control function in that, but this current system clearly is no good for the fans, and that's the main reason we're here. Whatever the solution is, something clearly needs to be done to bring back some gravity to qualifying, because at the moment, it's a complete farce." That wasn't the end of the madness for the weekend though, and the rules were to blame for Sunday being ruined as well. The Grand Prix was admittedly not the most exciting as they go. Nick de Vries scoring points on his debut and relegating Nicholas Latifi to 21st in a 20-driver championship was a highlight. Lewis Hamilton, Carlos Sainz and Max Verstappen's charge up the field from their penalty-affected start positions was impressive. The 7-time world champion going from 19th to 5th was much more like the Hamilton of old who's been absent this year. What was probably going to be a relatively unmemorable Grand Prix though was made memorable for all the wrong reasons, as the FIA's safety car rules ruined the end of the race. On lap 48 of 53, Daniel Ricciardo's McLaren retired between the Lesmo corners, leading to a safety car to allow marshals to retrieve it. The car was stuck in gear, and as the engine was completely dead, the marshals couldn't get it into neutral. As it was lifted off the course by a digger, the field was a complete mess behind a safety car that had come out at the worst possible time. The safety car picked up the wrong car, Russell, not Verstappen, and that delayed the process. Even when Russell went past, taking most of the rest of the field with him, the wrong lights were being shown on the car. And although it had been deployed only to recover the broken down McLaren of Daniel Ricciardo, not a crash, and there were still 6 laps to go, officials ran out of time to restart the race. An FIA spokesperson said Ricciardo's car had been stuck in gear, delaying its removal. "As the safety of the recovery operation is our only priority," a statement said, and the incident was not significant enough to require a red flag, The race ended under the safety car following the procedures agreed between the FIA and all competitors. Some of you may remember the crash that took Jules Bianchi's life back in 2016, and will understand why the FIA is so strict about safety while recovering cars from the track. Time does make us forget, but in this situation, we should never forget that tragedy. If you don't know what I'm referring to, then I recommend you go look it up after this video. While the safety of drivers and stewards is paramount, the situation could certainly have been handled better. Christian Horner says it was a relatively trivial incident. The principles of what we have always discussed is no one wants to see a race finish under a safety car like that, and it felt like there was enough time to get the race going. Despite there being a risk with it all being bunched back up, we would have preferred to win the race under racing conditions. And you could hear the displeasure of the crowd because it just felt like everybody had been robbed of that finish. The race finishing under the safety car meant there was no risk of Verstappen being overtaken by Charles Leclerc in the late stages of the race. Verstappen was on fresher soft tyres and had a faster car, so probably wouldn't have had trouble seeing the Monegasque off anyway, but the lack of risk should have made the Red Bull team happy. For Horner to speak out when the safety car guaranteed his driver the win says a lot. Ferrari boss Mattia Binotto was even more outspoken. "We don't understand why it took so long for them to decide," he said. "They didn't do a good job today, and they simply need to do a better job in the future because it's not good for F1. Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff had to be indifferent to the safety car after the events of last year, pointing out that the problem in Abu Dhabi was that the rules were not followed, which was not the case on Sunday. "Whether I'm Abu Dhabi traumatized or not, the rules were followed to the dot today," Wolff said. "There were marshals on the track, a crane out there, that's why they didn't let anybody overtake. And then there was not enough time to let everybody overtake. If one is not happy with the regulations and you want to have a big bang show and 2 laps of racing then mayhem, I'm up for it. But then you need to change the regulations. So I don't think we should complain about anything that happened because this is the rules." Disenchantment at the way the FIA is running F1 has been bubbling away among the teams for much of the season and is growing. Ben Sulayem has called a meeting on Monday to discuss a range of sporting matters with the team sporting directors. It follows, a statement said, a round of separate meetings held in Monza between the FIA president and a number of Formula 1 drivers. It is the first meeting of this type since 2013 and is part of the president's ongoing mission to improve the standards of the sport, bringing together drivers, teams, stewards, officials in a collaborative way. Horner said he was sure the handling of the end of the Italian Grand Prix will now be near the top of the agenda. While things on track were a farce, things off track were far worse. The fan experience over the weekend was apparently atrocious. Every fan forum we read has been full of reports of organisational incompetence at the Monza Grand Prix. People queued for hours upon hours to get to their seats, with many fans missing some racing despite turning up at the gates for 8 AM. Those with general admission tickets found that far too many had been sold, and the very limited space available to them was completely overcrowded, meaning they had no opportunity to see cars on track. The event was cash-free, meaning you had to buy tokens to then go to food and drink stalls and trade your tokens for what you wanted. Queues for this were again hours long and infuriated many fans. The fan zone wasn't even finished in time for the weekend, and when it opened was a huge letdown. And finally, and perhaps the worst of all the complaints from the weekend, was the lack of toilets. Some grandstands holding thousands of fans had 5 portaloos for everyone to use. This meant more queuing for fans and, by all accounts, some pretty unusable toilets. The Italian Grand Prix was a complete mess in every regard, and unfortunately for us fans, it was a huge disappointment. Whether you watched it on TV or live from the track, you came away with a bad feeling, and that just isn't good enough. The teams are right to question the FIA. The fans who attended the event should be furious at the organisers. And F1 as a whole needs to have a look at itself and ask, can we really not do better than this? What was your takeaway from the Italian Grand Prix? Do the safety car rules and penalty point system need changing? And do F1 management need to hold tracks more accountable for terrible fan experiences? Let us know your thoughts down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.